we're going to do tonight, basically, is we'll spend the first maybe 20 minutes, and I'll just give you a brief, or we'll give you a brief sort of overview, a little bit of the history of the Biennale in Shenzhen, and give you a general understanding of kind of what we're proposing there. And we'll give then some examples of some of the work that's happening. And then the second half, we'll invite some of the participants that are here in New York up to then present some of their projects that will be included in the exhibition. So also the exhibition will open December 6th, and it'll stay open until February 28th. So if any of you find yourself in Shenzhen, Hong Kong area, it'd be great if you can visit. So we hope it's going to be a great show. We think it will be. So the history a bit, this is the 5th Biennale in Shenzhen, or Bi-City Biennale with Shenzhen and Hong Kong. And the Biennale was initiated as a cultural dialogue between the two cities of Shenzhen and Hong Kong, sort of a diplomatic attempt for dealing basically with issues between the two cities, or the two regions, obviously Hong Kong and the Pearl River Delta. And Shenzhen basically was the ones who initiated the Biennale, and it's their planning department that has really spearheaded this entire Biennale. And they are probably the most, if not one of the most sort of, I would say, forward-thinking planning bureaus in China. And they're really doing a lot of amazing work, and they're really taking on a lot of these issues and topics on the city quite seriously. So again, for them, this is also important, not only to sort of locate the notion of the city within the context of global dialogue, but it's also important, obviously, for them. As we all know, this sort of area is rapidly urbanized over the last 30 years. So a lot of the issues and topics that these biennales focus on are, in fact, those that they're confronted with every day. So again, it's a very important kind of aspect to that. So this year, for the first time, there are basically two teams. The selection committee basically chose two chief curatorial teams. It's my team with Xiangning, the two sort of directors, and with Ole Baumann is the second team. And this year they've also selected a new site for the Biennale, and they have two different venues. So you see quickly on the slide there that it's in the Shekou port area of Shenzhen. You see just across the, I have the pointer here somewhere, sorry. Put it in my pocket. Here it is, sorry, right here. I have it. Which one's the laser? That? Sorry, one of these. Am I doing that? Is it this one? There we go. So this is Hong Kong right here, and this is basically Shenzhen, and this is the Shekou port area. And the historical center of Shenzhen is basically right over here. And basically the Pearl River Delta expansions all happen along the waterway and delta in this direction. So again, what's also been quite successful for the Planning Bureau and the Biennale in the past is that they locate the Biennale within a venue that will basically get renovated or refurbished for the Biennale, which then in hopes to be converted into a sort of a new district within Shenzhen. So this is really like the third location. The first location was actually near the sort of city center. The second location was in an industrial area in OCT. And this is the third site, which is a port area. So again, the idea is that with the Biennale as the sort of generator for renovation, but also generator for content, that this can sort of spur kind of new development around an industrial area. And it's an amazing sort of site here. You see, and obviously the location right along the water with Hong Kong across there is again a very vital kind of potential for future development. The theme for this, next slide is, won't get into the venues. So the theme for this Biennale is Urban Border, and this was also the first year where the Biennale committee assigned the theme beforehand, before they sent out the RFP for proposals for chief curatorship. And again, it's just a reflection of what they place importance on, the sort of issues of the border. Obviously, the border with Hong Kong and Shenzhen plays a very important part for them in the future, and it also plays a very important part for many of our participants in the exhibition. And you see, and again, here is just briefly the two different venues. It's not a very good image, we'll see better, but this is an old warehouse building. This is an actual ferry terminal to Hong Kong. So this is our venue site. So we're very fortunate to be right next to sort of a ferry terminal to Hong Kong. And the other venue, Ole Ballman's team's venue, is an old glass factory, which is about I'd say a 20-minute walk from this venue to an old factory. And here you see some just images of the warehouse in the plan. So generally it's about 40,000 square feet of a warehouse. And again, the notion of the urban border obviously is poignant, and certainly for our case of being on the edge of Shenzhen. But as I said, also that the idea of, again, adaptive reuse for a lot of these industrial buildings in Shenzhen is also very important, and in China, because as this sort of economy evolves, again, what to do with a lot of these districts and a lot of these buildings is an important question. So again, for us, that's very important, and you also, in Ole Ballman's venue, is also very critical to convert basically an old factory into a new cultural center. Just some of the images. The existing structure, and sort of our logo for the Biennale for our venue. So I'll spend a couple minutes just talking a little bit about the way we approach the theme, and then the sort of distinguish between how we've approached our Biennale with that of Ole Ballman, because they're quite complementary in the end between the two teams. The way we focused the notion of the border as sort of a critical research project in itself, that for us it was really important that in a way we define the project of the border, the potentiality of the border, the opportunities that borders provide for the way we think about the city, is something that will help us lead us think about, again, the future of defining the city and the city of the future. So, and again, the way that we think about this historically, so again, the historical context is important for our exhibition, which I'll show briefly, but also then how we think about the border in the context, in the contemporary context, but then also how we start to project forward and think about borders in the future. And in a way, in a concept, is we broke apart the compound word, bianyuan, a Chinese word, and basically defined this notion of the opportunity at the edge or at the boundary for us was the most important thing. So again, in a sort of very loose and general way, we framed our proposal around the sort of the potential, or how the boundary has inspired sort of architecture or urbanism, and also how it's been redefined historically and then into the future. So that's sort of how we've approached the project. And you'll see that again, we're not going to go through every single participant in the Biennale, but we took a lot of effort in selecting people for this Biennale that have invested intellectually in this topic, not just in China, but globally. So again, for us, unlike some Biennales where they have sort of a request for proposals, the way we approached it was, in a sense, we set up a framework and defined those people we felt were very important to further this discussion on the issue of urban borders. Our exhibition is basically broken up into 6 parts. The border timeline documentary, and we'll go into each of these a little bit, so I won't go into them now. Crossing border case studies, exploring the social boundary, national regional pavilions, border video gallery, and then special projects. So again, we're sort of organized it around these sort of general themes, and then within some of these themes we have sub-themes where we've sort of organized each of the participants. So we saw from the original sort of diagram or floor plan of the exhibition, this is now the sort of final exhibition that we have. And I'll just briefly, so entry is basically here, and there's sort of a subway station and bus terminal here. The ferry port terminal is on this side, and this is the sort of water here in Hong Kong is this way. But anyway, the main entry is essentially here. And again, as I described, the border timeline theme is the historical context where we set up the sort of project theoretically and conceptually, and that happens in this sort of crossing, this bar that sort of crosses across the 3 bays. And in that sort of is an historical timeline and a variety of other kind of projects which in a sense set the context for the rest of the exhibition. And we have case studies, more examples of either installations or projects, or in this section. Section on sociology is here. And then we have basically the sort of national and regional pavilions here. And then the video galleries are these little suspended pods that you'll see in some of the images here within the space. And just some of the images. So we're working with an artist now, I think, so this isn't really current, but also then what we do with the building itself and transforming the building with our sort of graphics. So these are just some very current photos of the construction that I think are all from the last couple days. So you see there that this is the big bar that cuts across the bays, will be this sort of timeline component. And then the pods, you saw the sort of pod there for the video gallery here. So we have all these independent pods which will be running videos and films during the exhibition. Sorry, wrong way. And each of these are like little light wells, courtyards that would go up to there. There used to be a separation between each of the bays, which is an open area that we wanted to maintain. And so these are sort of open light wells that will be filled with sort of glass or covered with glass that sort of divide up the exhibition into bays or sections. So the video pods. And sort of, we cut away some of the facade and created this sort of green curtain kind of line around some of the elevations. So I'll just quickly go into each of these parts, maybe a couple minutes for each. So again, the border timeline was really divided up into 3 parts. City cases, theoretical interpretations, and historical review. And again, this for us is important. It sets up the context for the exhibition itself, sort of as a documentary of the notion of the boundary or the border. And one of the key components is basically a large-scale timeline, which is going to be about 16 meters long inside the tube, which sets up over time basically the history of the urban border or urban edge. And what things influenced the expansion or contraction of the city or the city edge itself. So not just plans of cities, but actually what factors like technology, politics, et cetera, influence the way we understand the urban edge. And obviously we include in that sort of a dialogue across that timeline with important kind of architects, et cetera. Part of this exhibition is curated by Enrique Walker, where he's undertaking 4 interviews. They're being taped and will be presented there. The first 3 are basically Denise Scott Brown, Rem Koolhaas, and Attilio Bow Wow. And basically they're on the contemporary city and the notion of the book in the city and the influence of that and the way we think about cities. And then with each of the interviews also we start to deal with how some of these research projects deal with the urban edge. Here you see some of the images. This has all happened in the last few weeks. So there's Denise Scott Brown. And then there's Bernard, and then so again, that's a really important component for us that sort of sets up the general context. And I'll let Zoe is the curator for this project, City Case Studies, Past, Present, and Future. I'll let Zoe explain this project.
Thanks, Jeffrey. So for this project, I selected 15 kind of up-and-coming, relatively young architecture offices that are practicing in what we've deemed like global cities. And we've asked them to think about the theme of urban borders and how that might apply to the city that they're living in, whether they are physical borders, perceived borders, psychological borders, any of these things, and then how they might analyze this over time. So looking at this in the past, through history, and the present condition, and in the future. And so all of these participating offices have been asked to write a brief text that kind of positions their argument of their city's border, and then they are also supplying 3 images that help to explain their position. And so, as you can see here, some of the cities that we have architects participating in from include Mexico City, Istanbul, Beijing, Shanghai, Hong Kong, now Istanbul. So we're really excited about this project. And these are just a couple of images. This is Hantao, Beijing. This is his historical slide. This is his future image. This is Hector Lopez from SMSMXS in Mexico City. This is what he's submitted. And then this is Lisa and Ted Landrum from Winnipeg in Canada, and this is kind of their analysis. And I think what's super interesting about this project is that it allows the visitors to experience so many different takes on what an urban border is and how that can be perceived in the city. And when one walks through this documentary tube that Jeffrey was speaking about, you'll kind of first encounter this timeline that he already discussed, and then you'll see all these different perspectives from these different global cities. And so I think it's going to be a great project.
What's that?
Oh, and that's another one from Lisa and Ted.
So the next part is the crossing border case studies, and here in this section is where we invited a lot of practitioners. This has to do with the theme of urban borders within the practice of architecture. So here we have a wide range of exhibitions, from again research projects to speculations to actual architectural projects that all focus in some way on a urban border kind of condition. And within that context, we sort of divided up into 4 parts: city border, border and marginal architecture, invisible border, and the Shenzhen Hong Kong border, as I mentioned earlier, again, is a very major component for this Biennale for us. So I'll just go through just a few examples, and we've just selected a few that might be more well known for some of you in the audience. So we of course got Teddy Cruz. I think when we start the project, it's one of the first names that you think about as an architect and practitioner looking at borders. So again, his project will focus on the Tijuana border, Mexico-USA border in that project. And again, there's visualizations of the condition at the border itself, right, within his installation. Jürgen Meyer, again, his Scarpe border checkpoint, again, a very specific architectural project identified at a border zone. And again, what they've done in his office is basically constructed a topography, an installation based on the profiles of the building itself. We have Made in Shanghai, again, Tilio Bow Wow will be part of the exhibition. It's also sort of Made in Tokyo and Made in Shanghai collaboration they did with Tongji University a couple of years ago, doing a similar mapping of learning from sort of Shanghai. So we'll have that sort of as an exhibition within Biennale, again with their work as well. You see some of the buildings there. Another really great project, some of you might have seen this book, but basically Portraits from Above really looks at, again, these sort of informal settlements on the rooftops in Hong Kong. And again, there's a great team, Rafuna Wu and Stefan Cunham, who have gone through and documented many of these sort of informal habitats on top of these roofs. So again, looking again at these kind of conditions, informal conditions within the city. Jose Esparza in Mexico. Basically, his project has to do with constructing furniture that is part of a larger project that he's conducting in Mexico City, but has to do with basically co-opting the sidewalk, and sidewalk as public space, and then design of this furniture that can be placed and moved around the sidewalk to create then again different spaces for conversation, etc. So he's designed a number of pieces of furniture which will be moved around the exterior and different sites around the Biennale. Office out of Belgium with Bas Prinsen, the photographer that they work with, is actually doing an installation, this wall pavilion that they call it, which is basically constructing, again, this sort of brick cylinder built up, again, with just typical brick, a recycled brick in China. And then on the inside, Bas Prinsen, the photographer, has taken these photographs in Egypt of a ruin of an old temple, which will generally be projected then on the inside of this pristine sort of white drum. Joseph Grima and his team basically is looking at this again, a really fascinating project. Some of you might have seen this in Domus. I think he published that before he left as editor there. But Isla de Rosa, which again, this engineer or owner of a concrete factory essentially built this sort of structure just outside the Italian political waters, and was going to set up his own sort of community here. And even he had his own stamps and everything designed. But it only lasted about a year, and then even less than a year, but then the Italian government tore it down. So Joseph and his team are sort of documenting that as a project that dealt with political borders. Mad Architects is looking at the notion of building in nature. So Shan Shui is this project that they're basically exhibiting, which has to do, again, more with process in the way that they approach their architecture to the use of nature and the borders between, again, the built and the natural. Zhengke, Standard Architecture in Beijing. This is a project that is basically an installation, but a speculation on density having to do with basically urban villages, sort of a proposal of dealing with migrant workers and increasing density. And this sort of installation that he did was inspired by some of that research. So we'll have this sort of installation. The next part that we'll go into quickly is the notion of the social. Again, that's very important for us because it's not just the physical that we're looking at the Biennale. So for this part, we've invited a number of artists as well to collaborate in different projects that they've conducted having to do basically with issues of social issues, for example. And here an artist basically took the tile flooring from one of the like courtyard houses that was being torn down and preserved the tile and then is going to reconstruct the basic floor plan of this sort of demolished building within the Biennale. Liu Qingyuan is basically look at the notion of the porcelain tiles and then what used to be historical imprints of different let's say, utilities around the household, and then now has a sort of contemporary take on the notion of industry and technology, and has recreated these sort of porcelain tiles, which he'll install as a big mural within the Biennale. And Xu Bing is basically constructing this sort of telescope that will be set on the very edge of the site, and basically will project, from China, mainland China, to Hong Kong. Stefan Au, again, is looking basically at a research project in book, has to do with Factory Town. So obviously this is very specific to the Pearl River Delta. And it's basically documenting the social issues and the architecture and the planning of these factory towns throughout the Pearl River Delta. Another really important issue within the social has to do with urban-rural and the discrepancy between the urban and the countryside. So again, that takes a sort of section of this, and we have a number of projects that are focusing on that. Half of which are probably looking at China specifically, and the other half are looking at sort of global issues of the urban and the rural. Rethink Happiness, this is being sort of re-exhibited. It was in Venice, but again, a great project that deals with basically even a China sort of village, rural village. Again, the notion of innovate the food network. So Renmin University and Tsinghua University, taking a look at this research project. It just deals with the networks of food. Obviously, food scarcity and protection of arable land in China is a big challenge right now. So again, there are a lot of people and researchers looking at this issue. So again, this is a real important kind of issue for us to look at. Ning, who was one of the previous chief curators for the Biennale, his project, he is actually sort of constructing a sort of new intellectual commune within an existing village in the countryside, where he's returning, sort of giving opportunities for intellectuals to return to the countryside and setting up this kind of, again, organization within the village for both education and other sort of civic reasons there. So again, it'll be basically documenting some of the work that he's been doing in this new village, the Shan project. Okay, so the next part would look at basically national and regional pavilions. So like most biennales, there's a sort of component that has to do with basically extending the conversation to other nations. And for the Biennale in Shenzhen, it's a very important one to continue to extend this sort of dialogue. So we have a number of 9 pavilions within the interior of our space. And you see here the UK, Spain, the US, Canada, Mexico, Sweden, Italy, Belgium, and Macau are the selected countries. And in some cases, we made very specific selections. In other cases, that had to do with projects or things that they were working on that was very specific to the topic that we're looking at. So again, they're not necessarily countries you might first think about as being an issue of the border, being a topic, but again, it had to do a lot with the curators and what they're looking at. So UK is Jeremy Till, he's the chief curator, And again, he's looking at liquid boundaries, so he's looking at both media and other ways of representing kind of the issue of boundaries and borders within the city in architecture. Luis Fernandez Galeano is doing the Spain pavilion, and this is a piece he did at Venice, but he's bringing part of that to Shenzhen, which has to do in many ways exhibiting many of the sort of Spanish sort of projects, but also the participation of young architects who are now unemployed, who I think in Venice was a workshop. So what's produced in that sort of workshop is then being moved to Shenzhen and being an exhibit there as part of our exhibition. We see there what they were doing in Venice. Miguel Adria from Mexico. He's basically has a collection of architects that he's invited that again, he's asked the question for those architects to produce work that had to do with urban borders or boundaries. And you see just some images of his installation. Jeffrey Naba is chief curator for the US Pavilion. And Jeffrey's looking at sort of technology and the role of sort of technology of the United States and how that in a sense defines sort of issues, edges and boundaries. Italy, we're specifically looking at Venice, and of course the issue of natural kind of conditions with flooding and the water. So it's basically a documentary of over time seeing the change in the water level. And so it's a simulation and models of that change in Venice. Canada is taking a look at a very specific sort of new ethno-burb there that's then tracking the sort of change in that suburbia, but then also asking artists and architects to sort of respond to that kind of condition. Stockholm, or Sweden Pavilion is looking at this project Stockholm on the Move, which is engaging, again, I think more about public awareness and a series of workshops that deal with defining public space within Stockholm. That's a team. Some of the work they've been doing there. Belgium. And in Belgium, in a sense, again, is exhibiting a number 8 or 10 or 12, 20, or 20 young Belgian architects that are dealing, again, sort of cross boundaries or borders within Belgium, being centrally located within Europe. Again, practices that are expanding beyond the boundaries of Belgium and doing work abroad. Some of the examples there. And as I showed, the sort of little sort of suspended pods, video pods, black boxes before. So then we have a whole curated project by Du Qingxun on video and film in China and media, and the way that media and film basically depicts or catalogs or critiques the notion of urban borders or issues within China. Again, this will be an ongoing collection of films, etc. I won't go into all of those. And I think we'll just end with the exhibition again with the pop-up Studio X, because we're here and it's important, and most of us in some way are affiliated with Columbia. But again, as I said, Studio X is a very important component within this year's Biennale for many reasons. There'll be a pop-up Studio X in Ola Bauman's factory. Again, in Ola Bauman's approach to the project, it's more like setting up a basic platform where he's invited 12 international content collaborators to come in and bring content and then also generate content during the exhibition. So Pop-Up Studio X, which is directed by Marissa Yeo from Hong Kong, will be, again, a key player within the Biennale, producing, not only hosting things, exhibiting things, but also producing new content. And we see the installation, which will happen here, which is essentially sort of 3 parts. A space that can be converted for exhibition, one that can be converted for panel discussions, and then it can be converted into a workshop space. So we have sort of these components and furnitures hanging on the wall or from the ceiling that can be adapted and moved around depending on what kind of event is happening in the space. And then I'll just quickly show some of the images. So of course we'll have sort of 2 catalogs for the exhibition, and here's just sort of the quick design of the Chinese version of the catalog. The English version of the catalog will be a special issue by Volume magazine, so we're really excited about that, which will obviously be distributed internationally. And then there'll be what I show on the screen is basically the Chinese language version, which is designed in collaboration with Tongji University and graphic designers in China. And these are just some of the mock-ups for each of those parts. Great. So I think that's good for the first part, all right? So, all right. So I think now, and again, I think what's important, which is what we're really excited about, just to mention. So as I said, we open on December 6th. But also part of the commitment by the Biennale, but also to just, in a way, the importance that we hope that the Biennale can at least achieve globally is that again, we have a lot of great events that are happening during the opening, and we're really happy to have both Rem Koolhaas giving the keynote lecture and Attilio Bow Wow, Yoshiharu Tsukamoto will be give also a keynote lecture. So we're really excited about them being part of the Biennale, and again, extending these conversations about urban borders globally. So again, the notion of extending and other ways, and all the great participants that we have in the Biennale, we'd like to invite up. I guess we'll just do this like one at a time, if that's okay with you guys. Are we going with your guys first? Okay. So, Rafi Siegel, you want to come with your team? Sorry, I didn't really prepare who's coming first. Yeah. So again, we have Rafi Siegel and his team, Man Strauss and Jonathan Cohen. Again, as I said before, in the case for us, we've really made an effort to select the right team, the right people to invite to the Biennale, who I think have obviously have invested a lot intellectually in this topic. So, Ralph, you want everyone to come on? Bring your team? It's up to you.
I will introduce everyone.
Okay, we can do that.
Okay. Right. Okay, thanks, Jeffrey, Zoe. Our project is called Breakwater, and it deals with the Mediterranean. And all the members of our team somehow spent their childhood along the Mediterranean. And I'll introduce myself, Rafi Siegel, Jonathan Cohen here. You can raise your hand. Mayan Strauss, and Savina Romanos. Right. Maps both reflect and create a reality. And once they do that, they become our primary tool to understand that space or that territory. But also they become tools of negotiation. And the negotiation is usually on boundaries. The thing is, which often happens, that the reality changes, but the map stays the same. So one reality that has changed is a political one, which led us, myself and Jonathan, we couldn't resist, so we do this map of the world, which is a political map of the world that reflects territorial boundaries regardless of land and water. Water which has been referred recently as kind of submerged lands, right? So this political map understands a process that's been going on, that countries, nations have claimed sovereignty over water. And here you see kind of the connection between the US and South America. And here you see another kind of issue which explains a lot of kind of international conflicts. We're not going to show this in China. And the claim over water, the sovereignty over water, has to do with resources, has to do with fishing, of course, but kind of natural resources. But then also there are environmental issues, right? Pollution and other kind of problems. So when we look at the Mediterranean, we basically see where is the sea, right? I mean, we see that the sea is totally gone because every bit of the Mediterranean waters is claimed by one of the nations surrounding it. And this is a political reality which actually the political leadership of Europe realized not so long ago. And we see Sarkozy here in his attempt to create a Mediterranean Union based on the European Union of Nations. And I don't know if this is so promising because everyone he held hands with kind of is gone, right? Gaddafi, Mubarak, and this guy is probably next. So this attempt kind of to take what we could say a 20th century model of nations and create a union is probably not the way to go. So what we're kind of suggesting is a different kind of alliance, which is based on the city and not on the nation. And of course, the port city is are candidates. So here we have a few of the wonderful drawings of the ports of the Mediterranean, all sisters, we can say, or cousins, that share a common affection for the Mother Sea, right? They're all kind of based on the same kind of geographical, cultural history forces that have shaped them. And this is what the project is proposing, not only to begin to understand the kind of regional network based on cities, on port cities, but also kind of to explore that space of the sea. And here I'll kind of move to a project that Marianne will present. You want to say a few words on kind of her project that explores the space of the Mediterranean. Maybe you can, yeah, come over. You want to pass?
So the project, this project that I'm showing as part of Breakwater is basically, it started as a series of photographs. The story behind it begins between my first and second year of MFA in photography at Yale, when I actually went to visit Israel, where I'm from, and curiosity and no return flight took me on board a container carrier from Haifa in Israel, which we see in the picture, to New Jersey, in a trip that was, it departed from Haifa and went through several ports around the Mediterranean. We started from Greece, then a couple of ports in Italy, and then Spain, and then out to the Atlantic Ocean in a trip that was 7 days, crossing the Atlantic. And in every day I got an extra hour to sleep, which was great. And then I guess what the project, as my background is in architecture, and as both architect and photographer, the ship was, the ports were an interesting place because it is a very, for me at least, a very unfamiliar setting that is really fundamental and essential to our day-to-day existence. So it's this behind the scenes, if you will. It's like something that most people don't normally see and usually restricted. And so that was interesting, encountering the sea as infrastructure and not as we normally know it, maybe as a resort, as for most people. And then also in terms of space, kind of the tightness and of the interior spaces of the ship as a structure, in front of the vast expanses of the sea. And the ocean. So that's very striking also. And I guess in terms of borders, it is very interesting to also be for a more extended period of time in a space that is an ex-territory, that is not, that is high seas, that is not a national place, while you're surrounded with a crew of multinational crew of people from very, very various parts of the world. Also another personal thing about the experience of actually being on the ship was interesting for me because it's not just an ex-territory in terms of national borders, but also kind of crossing boundaries and being as a passenger in an X category, because I wasn't a tourist, I wasn't working on the ship, so also kind of the feeling of being in a space that you are not assigned with, because most of the time this realization strike me that I'm in a space or a place that is assigned to me, and all of a sudden was kind of out of that. So yeah, and last thing I guess that I would say in terms of showing this project and working in collaboration with Rafi and Jonathan is that really the physical experience of just moving from port to port and experiencing the port and as the front, as a gateway, instead of behind the scene that is how I normally knew it from the other side of the fence, or something that is in the outskirt of the city and kind of left.
Right, great. Okay. We're good? We can leave now?
Yeah, great, thank you. That's great.
No questions.
And we'll get quite a few questions after.
yeah,
That's
okay.
okay. That's good. All right. The next presenter is Surgeon Weiss. Surgeon. Again, Surgeon is an architect and professor here in New York, and has his practice NAO in the East Village. You're teaching this semester at Columbia, right? You taught at Temple and many other schools. So.
Yes.
Are you actually ready? Do you have your stuff?
Is there a way to actually run this as keynote? This is a keynote?
Oh, wait, you don't want to do full screen?
No, just run it as a keynote.
I don't think she actually has Keynote.
Okay, please.
Okay.
Okay. Hi. Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you, Zoe. It's actually really, I think, a special opportunity to address the issues of urban borders across the world, which they exist. We are, myself and my small studio, we are actually presenting one case that actually we started about in 2006 in the city of Philadelphia, just looking at the GIS maps of the vacancy rates of downtown Philadelphia. And you can see the black actually shows, in fact, how much empty space is in that city. Now, downtown Philadelphia is somewhere here. Uptown, which we are focusing on, has about 60% to 65% empty spaces, meaning that there are blocks and blocks without anybody in the city. Now, we like this map a little bit more because, in fact, when this information is presented as a kind of like a bad case, we kind of I looked into this as a sort of kind of potential nature in the city, which is not really so usual, and then analyzed the actual policy that city of Philadelphia has and its suburban areas. In fact, is that suburban areas do not pay any tax to the city. This is why, all the resources are being taken away. But we felt, okay, for the next 40 years in a suburban environment, is in fact will be no tax for construction for the next 40 years of suburban housing. Meaning that, in fact, we said, okay, if suburban city cannot pay money to the city, then why don't they just send their earth that they excavate during their constructions? So there was a calculation made that would kind of just calculate how much earth will be excavated and how much can it be sent to the north of Philadelphia and start making hills. Now, technology is right there. This is not a new process. If you take a train to Washington, D.C., you can see earth being moved very easily and very swiftly. So it is not that we cannot do that. So we made these kinds of images of potential hills in the north of the city, Flat City, in Philadelphia, and kind of imagining that they would not be populated. It would be actually empty. but there would be nature that would be actually right there. For the Biennial in Shenzhen, which actually made this project live again, which is really great, our group felt of kind of a need to make a model, 3 models, which will explain this idea in 3 different scales. And we are basically planning this kind of, this is 1/4 of the size of the model that will be produced. We actually would really like to demonstrate how would this Earth actually become part of the new urban landscape without population. So we have these kinds of maybe perhaps weird models that actually in fact really land Earth on top of empty buildings, making them also kind of you know, landmarks to visit from the inside, and also in different kinds of scales. This one is one of the largest scales models in 1/100, using felt as sort of like a material that can actually inhabit the city. And also we're actually going to demonstrate in one of these models, you know, how the Earth can be moved to the city, and you know what this process really is, and how long it takes to do that, because it is actually a process. This model is made of clay. So that's basically our installation for UABB, and we expect, in fact, to kind of start a discussion about, say, American city or empty city, not how to bring population in, but how to actually bring nature in the city without thinking about population. And we think this is kind of a new nature of the city.
I'd like to introduce Dominic Liang, who is one of the participants in the project that I'm doing. He is one of the partners at Liang Liang, an award-winning New York-based design office. Their work includes the completion of projects in New York, Seoul, Hong Kong, LA, and Napa Valley.
Thanks. Oh, here it is. All right. So I'd also like to thank Jeffrey and Zoe for inviting us to participate. It corresponded uniquely with certain projects that we are engaged with in Yangon and Myanmar. And so it's a really interesting opportunity for us to sort of think through this context in terms of boundaries and borders. And I'm going to do the thing that you're not supposed to do, which is read text. So Myanmar is in the midst of a radical transformation from a bounded country run by a military dictatorship to the boundless promises of democracy and the flows of global capitalism. The identity of the country within the global context and Asia is often described in terms of its geographic and economic boundary condition, strategically located between India, China, Thailand, and Bangladesh, and often described, quote, as Asia's last economic frontier. That was by the IMF. So the assimilation of Myanmar into the global market is based on speculation that the country will successfully transition into a functioning democracy with a transparent economic system in the immediate future. The call for foreign interests is to open up the country's boundaries to allow access to the abundant natural resources, cheap labor force, and untapped consumer market. It is impossible to predict how the country and its major urban centers, such as Yangon, will develop without understanding the dynamics of its political, economic, ecological, and cultural policies, which are currently undergoing major reforms guided by international organizations like the IMF. In 2011, both the EU and the United States lifted their economic embargoes, allowing for major flows of investment into the country. These effects the effects of these economic and political changes in policy can be understood as boundary conditions, virtual and physical membranes that regulate the flow of capital, goods, people, information, and resources. These multiscalar boundary conditions are formal and informal, legal and illegal, local and global, etc. Their dynamic nature reveals both the fragility and immense potential of the country as it moves into the future. Myanmar and its urban development will be defined by these complex boundaries and the protocols which define their behavior. So, as you can see, it's a country that's literally bounded by China and India and Thailand, and it sort of represents this very strategic location and has sort of been frozen by its military dictatorship. So Yangon, with an estimated population of 4 million people, will be the urban register of these boundary dynamics. In the next 15 years, the number of people living in Myanmar cities will almost double. According to a study by the McKinsey Global Institute, the urban population will grow from just 13% today to about 25% in 2030, an additional 10 million people, or 2 cities the size of Yangon. This projection represents a stark contrast to many of the buildings that sit vacant in the colonial city, slowly being overtaken by lush vegetation, frozen in time by impenetrable laws of land ownership, which are the legacy of colonial bureaucracy. Downtown Yangon is a living relic made mainly of low-rise buildings that become cities within themselves. The interior of these hyper-programmed villages occupied by diverse sets of inhabitants, lawyers' offices, a Buddhist temple, a vintage hotel, any number of programs. The romance of these interior worlds is quickly leveled by the unavoidable entropy which comes with non-existent public infrastructure. Light wells become repositories for decades of refuse as water streams from broken pipes. Certain lots have been strategically condemned by the city to allow for new developments. Although the Yangon Heritage Trust has identified 188 sites for preservation, the redevelopment of many of these lots is dubious and follows the influence of strategic landowners more for the criteria than urban development or any kind of a real plan. The result seems arbitrary. The redevelopment of the colonial city is largely guided by a desire to capitalize on Myanmar's identity as, quote, Asia's last frontier. Both a tourist destination and outpost for multinational corporations setting up operations in the region. However, the forces of urbanization that will accompany the development of the country pose much more complex boundaries. So, I mean, we're sort of at the very beginning of this understanding this context, and I think what we were interested in kind of exploring within this project is more, I would say, on the level of the potential effects that these kind of changes in policy could have on the urban fabric. And so this is Aung San Suu Kyi's the gate to her house. She's sort of the figure of democracy within the country and represents kind of the hope that the country will actually go through these kind of political reforms in 2015. Yet she's still kind of bounded behind this gate. This image shows in 2003 the difference in resolution provided by Google Maps that show kind of high resolution and actually zones that are almost redacted because of the lack of information that's being provided about the country. So it kind of exists in what some people call kind of bandwidth famine. And the idea that, I mean, it has actually very limited access to the internet. I was actually there, and I got to my hotel, and there was this note sitting on a desk that said the main link to the global internet actually broke. It was undersea cable and actually broke. So, which means the whole city kind of slowed down, and this one particular hotel actually still had the fastest bandwidth. So, the kind of social phenomena that happened there was the lobby became a kind of a headquarters for all these kind of multinational people, and this became almost like this hostile environment of people walking around with their laptops trying to like capture Wi-Fi. So there's this kind of interesting, I think, what we're interested in exploring is this relationship between bandwidth or kind of flow of information and the effect it actually has on how the city is going to develop. And so the idea that this is kind of an impression of we're kind of exploring these kind of potentials within the city, and the idea that this bandwidth or this undersea cable actually will have like a very kind of significant impact on what happens in the city. Also this idea of the kind of economic boundaries, that it's a mainly cash-based economy. There's actually no foreign banks, so you have people walking around with bags full of cash, which kind of represents another boundary in terms of a lot of these kind of international agencies describe or talk about the kind of economic penetrability of the country. Or the idea this city starts to turn in on itself because it has no public infrastructure. The interiors become cities in themselves. So you have these sort of kind of hybridized conditions on the interior where you have like a lawyer's office, a restaurant, secretary, and this kind of like this kind of it kind of grows in on itself because the city itself can't support any public growth. The river itself is also a boundary. A lot of discussion is going into how the colonial city would be redeveloped, with the fact that the buildings are in such disrepair. There's a discussion that they would actually just build another city across the river, almost like a Pudong in Shanghai. And that's it.
I'd like to introduce Tobias. He is one of the 3 partners at Innerborough, along with Dan and Georgine. Their office has won numerous awards for its innovative projects, and we are very excited that they're participating in the city cases.
So let's see. I called my presentation Studio X so that there would be no confusion here on the screen. Enter full screen. Okay. So thank you for the invitation. When we were asked to look at a border city, we decided to look at Detroit, a city where we have worked for a number of years now, and which is, as you all know, an international border city, the border to Canada here. We didn't look so much at that border. We weren't so interested in the border to Canada. But there are a bunch of other maybe visible and invisible borders in Detroit that are perhaps a lot more consequential than the border to Canada. One of them you probably know is 8 Mile Road. That's the line here that you see, the straight, almost horizontal line between the brown and the beige areas. That is the border between the city of Detroit proper and its suburbs, here seen through the filter of race. 2000 census map, and you see here how there's this extreme segregation of race along that boundary of 8 Mile. And it's not only a racial boundary, but it's a boundary that really defines life chances, right? There's just astonishing income disparity south and north of this boundary. There are obviously extremely different home values. It's really the boundary between that defines life chances. So it's an invisible boundary, but one that has extreme consequences. So somebody arbitrarily almost at some point drew a line on the map and said this is the edge of the city, but it has still astonishing consequences, depending on which side of this line you were born on. Just south of this invisible boundary, there's a very visible one, which you see here in the middle, that wall. That is a political artifact, one could say. It's that kind of piece of architecture, that kind of raw piece of architecture, or that's people at some point put up to define who can, enter, who cannot, who can use space. This is a wall, and I have to say we're very interested in these kinds of political artifacts, so much so that we're working on a book about that, which will come out in the spring. I'm going to put a little pitch in towards the end of this presentation for that.
So this is a political artifact that was put up at some point to keep certain people out. Who is it keeping out? Nobody really anymore. Here you see it there on the side next to that garage, that piece of wall that has a little graffiti on there. It doesn't keep anybody out anymore. But when it was put up in the early 40s, it was, even then, it wasn't really a bulwark. It wasn't like the Berlin Wall that was clearly defining who could go through, but it was almost more of a symbolic wall, a symbol. What was it a symbol of? A symbol of, well, racist mortgage practices. It is really a manifestation of this. This is a residential security map of Detroit. That is, again, another political artifact, another tool. In this case, not a physical wall, but a map that, again, defines, you know, what is the value of a home, what is, who can live where, and so on. You might have seen these. These were, and again, it's sort of interesting also because it's a map, like Rafi talked about, the way that the map actually defines our thinking of spaces. This is a map that in the 30s, this is a map from 1939, was drawn by an appraiser who basically ran around in the city and drew these little boxes filled with different colors that indicate in which part of the city of Detroit you can get a mortgage and in which city you can not get a mortgage, right? You've probably seen these or heard about these in urban history. They pretty much existed for all metropolitan areas in the US. These were done by the Homeowner Loans Corporation for the Federal Housing Administration. Federal Housing Administration was basically a New Deal tool to start development, start building activity after the Great Depression. So I make this really short, sort of a little bit of urban history. The construction industry was really down. The Federal Housing Administration came in and basically gave insurances for private mortgage lenders to give a certain security for those lenders to give mortgages out so that people could start building, developers could start building, primarily suburban housing. It was a huge success, that after, from the 40s on, there was enormous production of housing throughout the US. But this mortgage lending or this mortgage insurance came with certain restrictions, and one of them was spatial. So the Federal Housing Administration would only insure mortgages in areas of cities that were considered low risk, just to make sure that the people who get these mortgages don't, default. And then the question is, how do you measure risk in a place? The way it was measured in these residential security maps by these appraisers as we're walking down the streets was basically an area was risky, out of bounds, if there was a black person walking around, right? So here the measure of risk is really a measure of residential homogeneity or heterogeneity. Once an area is not entirely homogeneous, it is risky and therefore too risky for a mortgage. So you see here, zooming into these categories here, it goes from green to red, 4th grade, right, the red zone, and here a definition. This is actually a definition. It's sort of surprisingly hard to find these things. This is not Detroit, but Philadelphia, which is, but the categories are the same, and you see here the appraiser goes around, assesses the physical look of the houses, but then also sees, somebody who's black or Jewish, and that means this area is too risky. Okay, so, and if you again look at these maps, and maps exist of all the cities, it's really striking how much these decisions that some guy, based on prejudice at some point took, still affect our cities, right? These maps, these residential security maps, still very much apply to what area is in good shape and what area is not. Anyway, what does this wall have to do with it? this fragment of a wall here hidden next to the garage and in the bushes there. Well, a developer in 1942, I think, wanted to build a subdivision, again, just south of 8 Mile in Detroit, an all-white, middle-class subdivision, and applied for a mortgage, but was rejected because his site happened to be right next to one of the very few fairly prosperous African-American, single-family neighborhoods in Detroit. So he wasn't able to get this mortgage, right? It was out, was too close to this existing neighborhood, and so he then came up with this idea of setting up the wall. So this was the wall then that was that he basically set up between his new subdivision and this existing neighborhood, and then he was able to get that loan, right? So it's not a wall that really prevents people to walk through, but it was a precondition basically to get a loan in a federally insured loan. It's a striking artifact in that way, right? So, and obviously no law doesn't apply anymore. The exclusions in and around Detroit have taken on more subtle forms, many of which, and here's my pitch in the end, we document in our book, The Arsenal of Exclusion and Inclusion. There are about 200 of these tools documented right now. You see a few of them. So that is looking at, again, historical artifacts like these, really a wall that had this, was politically charged in this way, but then also more recent, newer, more subtle tools that people invent to, define who has access to space and who hasn't access to space. That's it. Thanks.
As you can see already, with just sort of a small sampling of some of the participants in some of the exhibitions, that the issue of urban borders is quite a charged one and quite an interesting one. And even, again, the diversity in the projects that we're going to exhibit, again, I think really expands on this idea across many kind of notions of boundary and border. So again, I think it's going to be a great exhibition that we're putting together. Also, we have like 75 projects, all as strong as these you saw tonight. So again, we're very excited about that, and hopefully if you can make it to Shenzhen or Hong Kong for the exhibition. If you can't, then you can look forward to hopefully the catalog and the extension of these sort of stories and these projects and other formats down the line. So again, thank you for everybody. I guess for joining tonight. The questions, anyone have questions? Anyone ask us, anybody here? Or we can do questions around the wine, the bar. Anybody? Admission is free for the Biennale, so you don't have to worry about that. If you can get to Shenzhen. I'm sure that was someone's question, I'm sure, right? Yeah.
Is there about the curatorial process?
Yeah.
And how bring all these things together, if at all, create sort of borders within themselves, or if you're trying to, what you're trying to do with that as an exhibit?
Yeah, the approach that we had, I mean, it's sort of funny in hindsight, because when we first were given the venue, we were really afraid of having sort of excess of space and how we were going to fill the space. And but you can see by the image of the actual plan, in the end, we filled it quite a bit. But again, the notion of the architecture of the building itself set up this sort of bay system that we wanted to utilize. So then we organized them around those existing bays and those existing partitions between the different zones. And then that sort of timeline bar component was one that sort of extend across all the kind of content itself and pull it all together. So in a sense, that's the way we organized the exhibition, thinking about the idea of the boundary, the border within the exhibition itself. But also, as you see, that there's also a notion that it's also boundaryless and borderless in a sense that it is really quite a sort of a high density of content in it, also. So there is sort of an organization on a sort of meta level, but then when you're sort of moving through it, then there is, of course, then again, a more urban density to the sort of exhibits itself. Yeah.
Did you approach any Eastern European boarding processes, symbolic ones and physical ones, like, I don't know, white ghettos in Slovakia, and so on?
Yeah, I mean, the way that we approached it as a curatorial team, we actually, I mean, again, we selected a number of participants in a way that were doing projects and research. Again, not all of them in the end could be included or invited, but again, we asked people that are already invested in the topic. Some have selected projects that they've been working on. Some have created new projects. And again, it was really up to each of the participants to focus on an area. It wasn't really, we tried to be somewhat geographic, but we didn't necessarily pick the topic or the issue itself. We sort of selected people or teams of people who were looking at the notion of a boundary or border. Right, no, exactly. I mean, that's, again, I think that's our approach as the curators, is that a sense that, you know, the most that we did was, again, a broad selection of people that we think, you know, are perfect for this sort of, this topic. And again, it's up to them, whether it's new content, new information, past projects, speculations. And again, just as you see tonight, there's a wide variety of the way that people approach the project. So we were pretty open and free to allow, once we selected the people and they accepted to, you know, urban border, this is the general topic, and we're really interested in see what you want to look into. So. Anything else? Okay, thank you.